So I guess one last thing that I should probably cover, at least like to give you basics, would be the footwork that we do. Footwork in Wing Chun is extremely basic, and I actually think that that's one of the strengths to this system rather than a weakness. I've heard criticisms from people who do like Japanese and Korean styles that have like, I don't know, like 10 different stances that they'll use. But the thing is that when I'm in the middle of a fight, I don't want to be thinking about, okay, well, is this a perfect side stance? Is this like a perfect, low horse stance or whatever? I just want to fucking fight, and I want to have a firm foundation. I don't want to have to fucking think about that. And so the way that we train with that, with that hips locked, sunk, our knees drawn together, and our feet slightly pigeon-toed is basically the basis of everything that we do footwork-wise. So I mentioned earlier that there's kind of a difference between our training stance and our fighting stance, whereas our training stance looks something like, something super sunk, super like, a little bit exaggerated. Our more, fighting stance, the thing that we would go into a fight with, would be something more like this. So my feet are still slightly pigeon-toed, my knees are still being drawn together, my hips are still locked, but you'll notice again that there's less strain here. Now the thing is that when we go in, there's modifications that we do to this stance. Like for example, that shift. When we shift, this is now called a turning stance. And that's pretty much it. We have our forward stance, we have our turning stance, and we have our short flat walk, which is how we move forward. When doing drills, when doing things that involve walking, we always want to keep that forward stance in mind, and I'll explain why. So if I stand off here to like a 45-degree angle and I turn, we always want to make sure that we're turning at that 45 degrees. Basically, I mean, obviously there's going to be some, play with that when you're dealing with a live opponent, but trying not to overshift and trying not to like make these big grandiose movements is very important to our system, because we're again trying to maintain that structure. And when I do that 45-degree shift, you'll notice that my hips, my shoulders, and my knees are still lined up. There's a word for this in Kung Fu and basically all styles of Kung Fu, because this is a really common element to almost every Southern Kung Fu style. But basically what it translates to is that these 6 points are lined up and they're not broken. If I were twisted over like this, my spine is twisted, I'm compromised. Same thing if I'm going over like this. In fact, this is like a really, really fucking bad position to be in. We want to make sure that those are kept in line. And actually, something that I like to think about too is I kind of like to imagine that there's a triangle. So like when we do this setting in Sealam Town, what I like to kind of imagine is that, imagine this is the center line of my opponent. And you see where my hands cross. That point where my hands cross is an extremely powerful point for me to throw blows to. And if you'll notice, both my hips are lined up with this point. Like this is a point on a triangle, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping that a right triangle to my opponent. Even when shifted, this is still a right triangle to my opponent. When I'm shifted, this is still a right triangle to my opponent. And by keeping them in this territory where like my hands cross over, this means that my blows are going to have like the maximum amount of force that I can put into those. I don't want to end my punch at the extension of my arm. I want to throw my punch through my opponent. And so, those are some things worth keeping in mind. With that short flat walk, which is kind of our method of locomotion forward, I'll go ahead and kind of stand off at a 45, and we'll show you here. This leg is loaded, so I already talked about that 60-40 distribution. So this has about 60% of my weight on it, and I'm bent here. I'm hanging off of my knee and off of my quad. When I move forward, I'm going to give myself an explosive burst of energy from that quad. And that's going to enable me to like push forward. Even if I'm taking kind of a lot of resistance, this is going to enable me to kind of push forward into something. We don't want to meet strength with strength necessarily, unless we have the body mass and stuff to do that. But what we want to be able to do is keep that moving forward. We don't want to get into a position where we're moving backwards, because our body just is not designed to move that way, and if we end up getting pushed backwards, that's usually a bad sign that we're about to get our ass kicked. If we do move backwards, what we want to do is we want to move backwards at an angle. The reasoning for this is that if you're getting a lot of energy coming straight for you, stepping off to the side is a much more advantageous position to be in. One of the reasons for that is we have a concept called fourth door. We have our 3 entry points here. So this is like 1, 2, 3, forget what they are. But 4 is from the side. And so if we have somebody rushing us, like bum rushing us here, stepping off to the side, with a little shift, now their fourth door is right here. It's right where I want it. If they're putting a lot of energy this way, it enables me to, I don't know, I could throw a kick out there, I could use that, I could do all sorts of terrible things to them to put them on the ground. So the more energy they give me, actually, the better that is for me. Let's see, in terms of other stuff, you may see people practice different kinds of steps. Like there's a thing called a crescent step that involves an almost tangerk motion, but it'll always generate the force coming off of that rear leg. It is in some cases called for to like do side steps and things, which also should be practiced. When you practice those, you want to move the leg that's on the side of the direction that you're stepping in first. So if I'm going this way, this leg steps first and then this leg steps second. You don't want to cross your legs because this puts you at a compromised position. There are instances in which you want to practice that crossed leg thing. That's something that I do, and you'll get into it later as you get into more advanced stuff. There's reasons for it. But for the time being, if you're just starting out, this is a much more advantageous way to move and to teach your body to move. And so that's what you should be practicing. But yeah, that's kind of the basics of the footwork. There's not a whole lot to it. You can practice those steps, moving this way, moving this way, moving this way. Practicing that shift is a really important first part of getting all of this stuff. And in our second form that involves actually kind of moving out in space and practicing a little bit of that footwork, most of the footwork that we involve, aside from kicks, is just shifting and doing that short flat walk. Doing that short flat walk, incidentally, is a really, really great way to build up leg strength. If you have the space in your apartment where you can kind of walk back and forth and do like 100 steps and just really sink into that rear leg, you will feel it after not very many steps, maybe like 15 steps. It's a real thigh burner. So, anyway, footwork.